Perhaps in space, no one can hear you scream, but on May 25, 1979, moviegoers who were not prepared for what they were about to see screamed, and the whole world heard it. The movie was Alien. And to say it shocked moviegoers would be an understatement. After Star Wars and Close Encounters of the Third Kind had portrayed mostly benevolent aliens, setting the expectation for what content a modern science fiction movie might have in it, Alien turned out to be a terrifying twist on the genre. Parents unwittingly brought their kids to the R-rated movie, some making it through the chestburster scene, while others making a break when Harry Dean Stanton says, "Kitty, kitty, kitty," unable to watch what was about to happen next.
Did you know that this was an R-rated movie when you brought him?
Yes, we did.
Are you sorry you brought him?
Yes, I am.
Are you sorry, sir, that you brought your son along to see Alien?
No, ma'am, I think he should have seen it. It's something that he needs to know, that things like that could happen in life. That could be a true story.
Did the movie scare you at all? Yes, ma'am, it did.
Ridley Scott's vision and impressive Alien box office earnings set a whole new bar for where science fiction could go, including the creation of the now iconic lead female character of Ellen Ripley, who, unlike women in previous films, wasn't there to be rescued, but to kick alien ass. And now, after 45 years of sequels, prequels, crossovers, and now a streaming series, the Alien franchise has earned nearly $2 billion, making it not just one of the most terrifying, but best science fiction franchises of all time.
Perfect. Organization.
Its nearly 5-decade storied history has taken some surprising twists and turns, but with Alien, becoming a successful franchise was the furthest thing from anyone's mind, as they were just crossing their fingers and hoping the movie would be made. It would go from a B-movie dream to terrifying moviegoers out of their seats, launching the genre of sci-fi horror on the big screen. It would launch the career of one of the greatest directors of our time, as well as become inspiration for movies like Pitch Black, Hostel, and the popular Expanse series. Oh, and let's not forget, give birth to the female action hero lead. Frightening and entertaining as it tested the limits of our fear, Alien not only left its mark on pop culture, but it leaves us with many questions as well. What sparked the idea to have humans face off against a nearly perfect killing machine with acid for blood?
Wonderful defense mechanism. You don't dare kill it.
Why did Ridley Scott choose a female hero? What inspired one of the most frightening-looking creatures in cinema history, and what trick did Scott play to not only terrify his audience, but his actors as well? Well, you are about to find out. This is the definitive history of Alien, and you've never heard it told like this before.
Get out of the way!
Stay tuned until later, where we'll be showing you why MyHeritage is the only software we use to explore our family heritage. And if you haven't already subscribed to our channel, please do so now, and give us a thumbs up if you want more videos like this. Also, consider supporting the channel by getting one of these limited collector's edition designs. There will be a direct link at the end of this video. Thank you for your support. The Alien franchise probably wouldn't exist today if not for the blockbuster success of Star Wars. You hear this a lot, considering Star Wars and Jaws before it pretty much invented the summer blockbuster. But when it comes to Alien, its green light was literally born from the envy of a board of directors that screwed up their deal with Star Wars. After the George Lucas masterpiece hit theaters in 1977, becoming one of the most important events in film history, not only did it become the highest-grossing movie of all time, but its success combined with the high-quality special effects opened up a whole new genre of movies that couldn't previously be made. And moviegoers were salivating for it. And no one knew that more than 20th Century Fox. The studio backed Lucas in making the film, but they made a huge mistake. Because they had no confidence in the film's success, they waived a $500,000 director's fee, instead giving Lucas the rights to sequels and merchandising. So when Star Wars crushed the box office, the studio's victory was blunted by the fact that they were going to lose millions in potential earnings. Little did they know at that time, they would eventually lose $10.3 billion earned by Star Wars. But in 1977, they already knew they'd made a huge mistake. Now scrambling to stay on top of the hottest new genre, Fox turned to the only script they had sitting on their desk. It was called Alien. The Star Wars effect was happening fast. Studios' concerns over making science fiction movies started to dissolve in the face of all-time box office revenues thanks to Luke, Han, Leia, and friends. But with Fox reeling from its own mistake, they quickly greenlit the only spaceship script they had, even though they really didn't like it. The movie may have been greenlit in 1977, but the true beginning of Alien started 7 years earlier in 1970 when USC cinema student Dan O'Bannon decided to make a science fiction comedy film with fellow USC student John Carpenter. Yes, that John Carpenter. The film Dark Star featured an alien created by spray painting a beach ball and adding rubber claws. The movie went from being one of the best student films ever made to one of the worst professional films ever made. Eventually making it to the big screen in 1974, Variety described it as a limp parody of Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey. Dark Star would eventually find a cult following through the VHS era, with Quentin Tarantino calling it a masterpiece. But O'Bannon found himself wanting more. He thought back to that beach ball alien and knew he wanted to create something more real.
An alien in it, which was a beach ball. It was our second try on that alien. I went away from Dark Star really wanting to do an alien that looked real.
But the comedy aspect of his movie had actually traumatized him. He went to some of the screenings and people weren't laughing. He realized people all laugh for different reasons, but everyone is afraid of the same thing. It was then he decided he wanted to make a horror movie. Dark Star had caught the attention of another budding writer, Ronald Shusett, who reached out to O'Bannon after watching the film. Shusett had recently optioned the Philip K. Dick short story, We Can Remember It For You Wholesale. O'Bannon was impressed with Shusett's writing, so he pitched him his idea for a horror movie that was only a 29-page script titled Memory. He had gotten through the first act of the story, but was struggling with where to take it. In the end, Shusett agreed to help O'Bannon with what would eventually become Alien if O'Bannon would help him write the Dick short story he was now calling Total Recall.
He said, I can't make the breakthrough from here, but he said, I'll help you do Total Recall and you help me do Alien.
As it would turn out, two great science fiction movies were born in that same meeting. The duo agreed to start with O'Bannon's script since he already had a chunk of his story done and it would be cheaper to make. Inspired by Dark Star, he knew he wanted his horror story to take place on a spaceship with an alien and a small number of astronauts. But before the new writing team could begin, O'Bannon got a phone call from Paris, France. Within a few weeks, O'Bannon was off to France working on an adaptation of Frank Herbert's Dune, affectionately known as Jodorowsky's Dune. If you want to know more about Jodorowsky's Dune and O'Bannon, as well as a lot of the creatives who worked on Alien, make sure you check out our definitive history of Dune here right after this video is over. Jodorowsky's Dune would never make it to the big screen, and while O'Bannon found himself homeless and broke when the project fell apart, some of the creative relationships he developed on Dune would eventually be cornerstones to the success of Alien. But more on that in a moment. First, O'Bannon, with nowhere to go, called Shusett and asked if he could crash on his couch in Los Angeles. Shusett said of course, and O'Bannon, depressed, slept on the couch for a week. But after a week, he took a hard look at himself and he knew he couldn't live on Shusett's couch forever.
And I was in desperation. The only thing I could think to do, I had to sell a script.
O'Bannon pulled out his old memory script and he and Shusett got to work. The first 29 pages of his script had the crew being woken up from their journey by a signal on a planet they would have to investigate. But he wasn't sure as to what the alien antagonist of the story would be. Shusett reminded O'Bannon of another of his script ideas that had gremlins on a B-17 bomber during World War II that had gotten on the plane and was working their way up to the cockpit, and the pilots had to barricade themselves in until they could land. He suggested using that and setting the alien on the ship in the second half of the story, but they still hadn't figured out how to get the monster on the ship. Shortly after, Shusett woke up in the middle of the night and told O'Bannon that he had thought of an idea. What if the alien had sex with one of the astronauts by attaching itself to its face, sticking a tube down its throat, and putting a seed in him?
Jumps in his face, plants a tube down him, inserts his seed in him, and later it comes bursting out of his stomach and then goes, oh my God, it's the most amazing thing I've ever heard.
The story was coming together, but memory wasn't going to work. The new title for the story became Star Beast, but O'Bannon really didn't like it. He had tried a number of titles and nothing seemed right. But one morning at 3 a.m., he was typing dialogue with the characters saying alien this and alien that, and suddenly the word came off the typewriter at him.
I said, alien. It's a noun and it's an adjective. I said, yes, that's it.
He knew he had his title. It took about 3 months, but the alien script was done. O'Bannon brought Shusett on as a producer, and they started shopping the script around. They pitched the movie as Jaws in Space, which was an excellent marketing idea considering it had been the first summer blockbuster the previous year. But despite the hyped premise, Alien was nearly sold as a low-budget Roger Corman movie until a friend of theirs asked to read the script and promised he could get them a better deal. The script would end up in the hands of Walter Hill's Brandywine Films. Hill had directed Hard Times in 1975, and the new company he had created with David Giler and Gordon Carroll was looking for scripts they could develop. They also had a relationship with 20th Century Fox. So how important was the chest-burster scene to the movie Alien? It was everything. Brandywine Films thought the script was terrible.
The script is terrible, but it has one great scene in it, and read it and tell me what you think.
When they got to the scene when the alien bursts out of the character's chest, they knew they had to buy the story.
And I came to the chest burster and I called him back and said, well, I see what you mean.
They also loved that the alien's blood was made of acid, making it so the crew couldn't just shoot and kill the creature. This was a suggestion made by artist Ron Cobb, who worked on the original artwork for the ship and had been working with O'Bannon for several years going back to Dark Star. Once the deal was struck with Brandywine in October 1976, the rewrites began. The problem was, Fox didn't like the original script either. While the spine of the story remained, the rewrites changed the feeling of the film, taking what they saw as a B monster movie and turning it into an A movie. In the end, much of the dialogue, the characters, the idea of truck drivers in space, and Ash the android came from Brandywine's rewrites. O'Bannon would spend his life believing that Brandywine tried to take credit for writing Alien. But the truth is, Alien's unintended collaboration is what ended up making it one of the greatest franchises in science fiction history. 20th Century Fox president Alan Ladd Jr., who was responsible for both Star Wars and Alien and would later greenlight Blade Runner and Spaceballs, was responsible for approving a director. He initially thought Hill would direct the movie as part of their deal with Brandywine, but Hill wasn't comfortable with special effects, so the search was on. An A movie would require an A director, so Robert Altman and Robert Aldrich were asked among other directors, but they all passed. There's a chance that if it wasn't for Steven Spielberg, Alien may have never been made. Spielberg, known at the time for Jaws and Close Encounters of the Third Kind, was brought in to see if he was interested in doing the movie, but he couldn't do it because he was committed to making 1941. Spielberg read the script, and when he found out Ladd had already put the project on hold because it was too expensive to make, Spielberg told him he was crazy. This is one of the greatest scripts, an all-time classic movie. You're crazy if you don't make this movie. It's going to make a fortune. That seemed to be enough to get the project going again. And at about this time, an unknown first-time movie director was receiving an award at the Cannes Film Festival for his movie, The Duelists. That director was Ridley Scott. Scott had spent the 60s directing TV episodes on the BBC, and in the early 70s he started making commercials in Britain. The Duelists was Scott's coming out party. The film was acclaimed for providing a historical, authentic portrayal of the Napoleonic uniforms and military conduct. Scott thought he knew his path forward, believing his next movie would be to adapt a version of Tristan and Isolde. But then, a friend took him to see Star Wars. It stopped him in his tracks.
I went and saw Star Wars, I think, in the opening week, and of course that, like everybody else, blew me away, and it completely set me off course.
He was depressed for 3 months, thinking, how could he continue making the movies he was planning to make when movies like Star Wars could be made? Fate would intercede in Cannes a few months later when he was debuting his new movie. As luck would have it, David Giler from Brandywine just happened to be in Cannes watching The Duelists. Hill and Carroll also screened the film and were stunned with Scott's control of the picture. They sent the script to Scott in London, offering for him to direct Alien. He read it over the course of an hour and a half, yelling, "Oh my God," multiple times throughout the reading. Not only did Scott love the script, but because he had the eye of a designer, he could see the film and knew exactly what he wanted to do. Within 26 hours of reading the script, he was standing in Hollywood. After meeting Brandywine, O'Bannon, Shusett, Cobb, and the Fox executives, Scott knew the first thing he needed to do was storyboard the whole movie. He flew back to London and spent the next 3 weeks visualizing his film. Fox was so impressed with the storyboards, they doubled the budget from $4.2 million to $8.4 million. Scott had been inspired by 2001 and Star Wars, but he was making the Texas Chainsaw Massacre of science fiction. The studio loved where Scott was going, but Scott still had a big problem to overcome. What was the alien? Everyone involved in the movie knew that if they didn't get the alien right, nothing else would matter. Remember when we said earlier that the relationships O'Bannon created during the failed Dune project would benefit him later on Alien? One of those was Hans Rudi Giger. Giger was a contemporary Swiss artist who had built a name for himself creating unsettling airbrush images blending human physiques with machines. His biomechanical nightmarish artwork had made an incredible impression on O'Bannon, and when he met Scott for the first time, he shoved Giger's book Necronomicon into his hands. When Scott saw the painting, Necronom 4, he knew he found his alien.
And I nearly fell off the desk, said, "That's it," and why look farther? And so that's how I saw it. It was as simple as that. I've never been so certain about anything in my life.
The only problem was, Fox didn't like it. They thought Giger's work was too ghastly for audiences, but Scott simply had to have him, and Fox gave in. The biggest design problem of the film had been solved. Scott was so impressed with his work, he would eventually ask him to design everything alien in the film. With Giger now working on Alien, O'Bannon was intent on bringing his Dune team back together. He was able to bring in Chris Foss and Jean Mobius Giraud as concept artists. They, along with Cobb, created a dream team that would help Scott bring his movie to life. Alien gets a lot of credit for being one of the first blockbuster films to have a strong, action-oriented female protagonist. This is in large part thanks to Fox and a little pandering by Brandywine. At the time they were pitching the film to Ladd, Brandywine was well aware that Fox had been focusing on making movies like Julia and The Turning Point, which were female-centered movies. Because they wanted every opportunity to get a green light, they changed the main character of Ripley from a man to a woman. As it would turn out, their instincts were correct, as Ladd really liked the idea. But who would play her? Scott wanted good actors who didn't need a lot of direction, as he wanted to focus on the film's visual style. Casting calls and auditions were held in New York City and London. Sigourney Weaver at that time was not a star, but Warren Beatty had seen her in the 1976 play Titanic, called up Greer and said, "Listen, I've seen this young woman on stage off-Broadway called Sigourney Weaver. I think you should see her." Giler gave her name to the casting director in New York, and Weaver got the script and an audition. She wasn't impressed with the script, and when she showed up at the wrong location for the audition on a Friday afternoon, she told her agent, "Let's just pass." But her agent persisted, and Sigourney went through with it. As luck would have it, being nearly 30 minutes late and watching Weaver try and hold her composure while acting through a difficult situation was exactly what the team needed to see. She was tall, imposing, and exactly who they were looking for. They had found their Ripley.
This was a kind of direct person who didn't have these scenes where she was suddenly vulnerable, and she didn't, throw her hands up and wait for someone else to save her. She was a thinking, moving, deciding creature.
The only other person seriously considered for the role was Meryl Streep, but she was mourning the death of her partner John Cazale at the time of casting, and she was never approached for the role. Helen Mirren also auditioned for the role, saying later that she didn't know if she was reading for a man or a woman, and it would be a revelation for her. Sigourney Weaver would not only go on to make Ripley an iconic character, but she would create memorable characters in Ghostbusters, Galaxy Quest, and Avatar as well. Veronica Cartwright was cast in the role of Lambert. A 19-year television veteran, Cartwright had made a break into the movies in 1978, first in the Jack Nicholson film Goin' South, and then The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. When Cartwright was asked to audition in Los Angeles, it was for the role of Ripley. Believing she had been cast as the main character, she went to England only to learn she'd been cast as Lambert, even though she'd never even read the part.
Well, I called the producers. I said, well, I haven't even read this part. I mean, Lambert just cries through the whole thing.
It bothered her that her character was so weepy all the time. But when they told her she was a reflection of what the audience was feeling, she felt better about the role. After Alien, she has been in more than 125 productions, most notably The Right Stuff, Flight of the Navigator, and The Witches of Eastwick. When Tom Skerritt originally read the role of Dallas from a hotel in Minneapolis, Minnesota, he didn't feel very attached to the project. He was halfway through working on the film Ice Castles when he received the script for Alien. There was no director, and the reported budget was $2 million, which Skerritt didn't believe was enough to make a quality film. And with that, he turned down the role.
When I read Alien initially, I wasn't drawn to the project. Ridley wasn't attached. It was, my understanding was going to be a $2 or $3 million budget on it. And I thought, well, you're not going to make an effective film for that. And
Harrison Ford was also offered the part of Captain Dallas, but didn't want to take another space movie so soon after Star Wars, and also considering he was still tied to The Empire Strikes Back. So about a month after Skerritt turned down the role, he got a call from England. It was Carol from Brandywine, letting him know about Scott directing and the budget increase. They offered to screen The Duelist for him. After only 5 minutes of watching it, Skerritt knew he wanted to work with Scott. After Alien, Skerritt would go on to act in more than 100 roles, most notably Viper in Top Gun. For the role of Kane, Scott wanted English actor John Hurt, but he was already committed to making Zulu Dawn in South Africa. Scott cast English stage and film actor John Finch, who became well known for his Shakespearean roles. Finch could have been forever remembered as James Bond when he was offered the iconic role in 1973, but he turned it down and it was given to Roger Moore instead. Finch's time on set was short, and there are 2 different stories about why. Scott would say Finch got sick with diabetes, and Finch would later say it was a bad bronchial attack. Regardless of why, Finch would lose the role of Kane.
First day, first shot, he starts to look as yellow as this pencil. And I thought, God, what's wrong? And we did a couple of takes, and he seemed to absolute lackluster.
As luck would turn out, Hurt had been turned away from South Africa on a misunderstanding and was no longer doing the film. Scott drove to his home and pitched him on Alien. Hurt was on set in the studio the next morning at 7:30.
And on the Tuesday morning, I was on the set at 7:30. So it was not a usual film for me. The script didn't arrive, and I didn't mull it over, and I didn't decide this, that, and the other. I had a long pitch from Ridley, and a very interesting one, too.
John Hurt is known for a lot of things. He was nominated for Academy Awards the year before and the year after Alien hit theaters. But for most filmgoers, he will always be recognized as the guy who had an alien burst out of his chest. In his life, he gave more than 200 on-screen performances, including notable ones in The Elephant Man, 1984, Harry Potter, and Doctor Who. Hurt was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 2015 for his services to drama and sadly passed away in 2017 at 77 years old. For the role of Parker, there seems to have only ever been one person, and if you believe in destiny, perhaps this is proof of it. Yaphet Kotto had apparently seen the original script way before O'Bannon and Shusett sold it, as Kotto was a friend of theirs. After reading that script, the man who had played Mr. Big in 1973's James Bond Live and Let Die said he'd been waiting 15 years for a script like Alien. He loved the script so much, he turned down lucrative roles and argued with his agent about it. When he was offered $2 million, more money than he'd ever made on a movie, he asked his agent about the Alien project. His agent told him to take the offer with the money, but Kotto held his ground. He said, "I don't care if they give me nothing to do Alien. I want that role." Kotto saw the role as an opportunity to break away from stereotypical parts given to black actors. And as it would turn out, he didn't even have to audition for it. Fox called and offered it to him. Ironically, Kodo only needed to go into space once. While filming Alien, he was offered the role of Lando Calrissian in Star Wars The Empire Strikes Back. He passed on it after all that work getting a role in space in the first place, saying he didn't want to be typecast as a space guy. Kodo's more than 5-decade career included nearly 100 roles in film and television. Some of his most notable movies included The Running Man, Midnight Run, and the TV series Homicide: Life on the Street. He passed away in 2021 at the age of 81 while living in the Philippines. Harry Dean Stanton had been in the movie business for 24 years when he got the role of Brett in Alien. During his interview, he seemed to be the one with the questions. Stanton wanted to make it clear that he didn't like science fiction or horror films. And then he pointedly asked Scott if he had enough money to make the movie. Scott later told him that's the reason he hired him, to show him he had the money. The truth was, Stanton wasn't attracted to the Alien script at all, but Ridley really wanted him in the movie, and the director's enthusiasm won him over. Stanton performed more than 200 roles as an actor in his 66-year acting career. Some of his most notable movies include Escape from New York, Repo Man, and The Green Mile. He passed away in 2017 at the age of 91. Ian Holmes' agent told him he was being offered a part in a very expensive B movie. The part was for the android Ash, and Scott was very excited to have the English theater actor for the role. Holmes was about as big a theater star as there was at the time. Scott feared of all the cast he might be the most difficult to work with, needing lots of questions answered. But as it would turn out, he would be the easiest. The one concern Holmes had was about how Scott wanted him to play the android. The director told him that Ash was a humanoid version of the computer in 2001: A Space Odyssey, and he wanted him to play the role as a realistic human. Holmes' concern was that he typically built his character off of some other historical person or literature, but in this case, he was playing something of the first of its kind. Despite the concern, he obviously figured it out. Holmes' incredible acting, which resulted in a surprise robot reveal, would unsettle audiences so much that it inspired a continuation of other androids in the franchise. Holmes was knighted by Queen Elizabeth in 1998 and performed more than 140 times on the big and small screens. He has been in many roles, but late in life would be recognized worldwide for his role as Bilbo Baggins in Peter Jackson's The Lord of the Rings trilogy and The Hobbit. Holmes passed away in 2020 at the age of 88. Filming began on July 5, 1978 at the famous Pinewood and Shepperton Studios near London. The crew had a very short 3.5-month production schedule due to the film's low budget and pressure from Fox to finish on time. At the start of production, Scott had 9 producers on set at all times, questioning him and pushing him to move faster. The crew included more than 200 people who constructed 3 main sets, including the surface of the alien planet and the interiors of the Nostromo and the derelict spacecraft. Scott had seen how clean and shiny 2001 was and wanted to dirty up his movie. He wanted patches on seats and a look to match his space trucker's crew. He wanted each corridor to look different, and they dismantled aircraft from a scrapyard and started attaching things together to give it pattern and depth. He wanted the set to feel like he was inside the ship, so there were no moving walls, and they actually had to walk to different locations inside the ship to shoot. He wanted the cast to feel claustrophobic. When Scott felt like the ceiling was too high, they dropped it. Weaver had only 4 or 5 inches of clearance at the doors, and in the end, they ended up with a very believable set.
Everything was so claustrophobic on that set. I mean, that is one of those sets where you walked in and there's the engine room. Well, that's fine, but connected to that is the corridor. Connected to that was the cafeteria. Connected to that was the hospital. It was all connected, the ship. So once you were on, you were on.
Scott knew getting the right performances from his actors would have a lot to do with their surroundings, so he made each situation as real as possible, including not giving his actors all the information on scenes they were about to perform. Take the most famous moment in the movie, the chestburster scene. The cast had no idea what was about to happen, and what you see in the movie is their actual shocked and horrified reactions.
Or John on the table, you know, with his with the puppet all ready to go, and the actors brought in. in this long set where you couldn't see that it was a set, you know, you were just all packed into this room, like on location, on the Nostromo, you're shooting this scene.
No one expected it to be that graphic, realistic, and terrifying.
It was like a jet of blood that hit I was so taken aback.
Even the crew wasn't certain what was about to happen. They knew it would be frightening, but they were equally frightened that it might not work. When the alien bursts through Hurt's chest, a pint and a half of blood ejected right into Cartwright's face, and she screamed and disappeared off screen. She was in shock and nearly fainted. Everyone in the scene was shook, and when they took it to the room where they watched the dailies, cinematographer Derek Van Lint threw up after watching 20 minutes of the chest burster. It affected Cobb so much when he left the screening he walked into a wall and got into the wrong car in the parking lot. The scene was completely successful. Later, Scott would reflect that after watching several screenings at the theater, during that scene, he said he witnessed true terror on the faces of moviegoers. Ridley knew what he wanted from his actors, and that meant keeping them uncomfortable and on edge. And that included filming rehearsals as scenes and letting them go for it. As the youngest, most experienced, as well as the lead, Sigourney needed a trial by fire, and tension between her and Kodo provided the motivation. In the scene after Dallas is killed and she becomes the captain, Kodo ad-libbed several of his lines, pushing her until she delivered her line that she was the captain convincingly.
You're the captain of the ship. I'm 250 pounds, black as can be. I have a fucking following. Bitch. So if you're the captain of this ship, you better fucking tell me I am. So now this time he comes into the thing and she goes, I'm the captain of this ship, and he says, okay.
After a lot of tension, it worked and set the tone for Weaver's performance for the rest of the film. At the beginning of filming, Scott refused to show the actors the creature they would be fighting until just a few days before they started filming with it. Scott invited the actors to come and see the creature.
And so he invited everybody to our studio, and I was standing there with the cognac and glasses. And Sigourney came and said, oh, I don't need any cognac. And she stepped in, and then she rushed out and said, give me a glass of cognac. She was totally scared.
And that's exactly what Scott wanted. A big part of the realism Scott captured on Alien was thanks to the work of all of his artists, but especially Giger, who was able to bring his uneasy drawings to life in an alien world. He sculpted a landscape of bones in what felt like a biomechanical living landscape. In order to make Giger's set look as large as possible, Scott brought his two young boys in and put them in spacesuits, which you see during the scene where the astronauts come into the room with the space jockey. To get the look of a smoky membrane around the eggs, Scott had to think outside the box. They didn't have the budget to do CGI, so the band The Who happened to be rehearsing and testing laser light gear on a nearby soundstage, and they were kind enough to lend them to the director for use in his movie. It would arguably turn out better than CGI. The inside of the eggs were actual pig intestines, hearts, and livers to get the realistic look of the inside of the entity. In order to ensure the movie was shot with his vision, Scott shot about 80% of it himself. For the alien, Scott originally wanted to use animatronics to portray it to avoid playing the monster as a man in a suit, but the special effect techniques of the time weren't sophisticated enough for what he had in mind. But his mind was changed when he met the 6-foot, 10-inch tall Balaji Badejo, who hung out at the local bar. He was tall and thin and exactly what they needed to make the alien look less human and more insect-like. Even though he'd found his guy, Scott kept the screen time for the alien limited to hide its human look. If anyone was ever curious what that liquid was coming off the alien's teeth, it's KY jelly. There were 4 cats used in the film to portray Jonesy, 1 for holding, 1 for hissing, and 2 for running off. On the first day Weaver started shooting a scene with the cat, her skin started reacting. Thinking she was allergic to cats, it turned out she was actually reacting to the glycerin sprayed on her skin to make her look hot and sweaty. The original name for the crew's spaceship was Snark. This was later changed to Leviathan before they finally settled for Nostromo, which was named after a Joseph Conrad novel where an Italian explorer tries to plunder a silver mine. Leviathan would have been a perfect name considering Nostromo is supposed to be 800 feet long, towing a craft 1.5 miles in length. Like most movie sets, mistakes are made. But Weaver had a pretty big faux pas while filming her intense scene with the alien just before blasting it into space. She sings "You Are My Lucky Star," a song from Singing in the Rain. Weaver thought it was a good idea as the romantic lyrics were a stark contrast to her relationship with the creature. The only problem was, it made Fox angry, forcing them to fork over extra money for the rights. As principal filming was coming to an end, Scott felt the ending was too simplistic. This movie was originally scripted to end with Ripley escaping in her shuttle and the alien dying on board the Nostromo. So Scott negotiated with the studio for an additional $500,000 budget and a week of filming to add a fourth act to the movie, showing how the alien had stowed away aboard the shuttle. Scott initially envisioned a very dark ending where Ripley tries to flush the alien out, but the creature climbs back into the shuttle. Ripley harpoons it, but it makes no difference. It runs towards her, slams through her masks, and rips her head off. It would then sit in her chair and start mimicking Captain Dallas's voice, saying, "I'm signing off. Hopefully the network will pick me up." 20th Century Fox wasn't pleased. According to Scott, while pitching this idea over the phone, there was a long and uncomfortable silence. Within 14 hours, a studio executive arrived, threatening to fire him on the spot unless he changed the ending to one where the alien would die. So instead, he decided Ripley and the alien were meant to be sucked outside the shuttle, both hanging by Ripley's safety cable that tethers her to the craft, until she climbs back aboard and activates the engines to kill the alien. However, this had to be simplified due to time constraints. Scott later admitted that allowing Ripley to live was the better ending. Shooting ended on October 21st, 1978. Editing and post-production would take an additional 20 weeks. Composer Jerry Goldsmith, who'd done the music for The Planet of the Apes, Chinatown, and The Omen, was brought in to score for Alien. But when the director listened to it, Scott felt that Goldsmith's score was far too lush and needed to be a bit more minimalist. Goldsmith then did a second attempt, which he called Weird and Strange, but everybody loved it. But when Goldsmith found out Scott and editor Terry Rawlings had amended his score, re-editing it, and even rescoring it in several scenes, he was horrified. Rawlings even dropped his score in several places and had inserted segments from one of Goldsmith's earlier scores from 1962. He'd also replaced Goldsmith's end credit music with Howard Hanson's Symphony No. 2. Rawlings and Scott ended up preferring them to Goldsmith's revised work. In the aftermath, Goldsmith harbored a grudge against the two men for some time. He was so upset he insisted that his work on Alien not be considered for any awards. Apparently, this allegedly upset the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences and cost him an Oscar for his score for Star Trek: The Motion Picture in 1979. Which he was widely expected to win. Goldsmith would later say that Ridley is a brilliant filmmaker, and I think that was just his second film and he wasn't as articulate then about what the music should do. He would later score the director's cut of Scott's movie Legend in 1985, and his original score for Alien was later added as an alternative audio track on several DVD and Blu-ray editions of the movie. The initial rough cut of Alien was over 140 minutes long. After some fine-tuning of the film's pacing and cutting out a cocoon scene with Tom Skerritt, they would deliver its 117-minute theatrical running time. The first test screening of the movie was hampered by sound issues and got only a lukewarm reception. But by the second screening, the makers had their first indication that the movie was as scary as they had hoped for. It was reported that attendees screamed in terror.
The theatre was fantastic. The sound was great. It was the most incredible preview I've ever been in. I mean, people were screaming and running out of the theatre.
And even 20th Century Fox president's wife got so scared that she refused to leave her house for a day and a half. Several of the crew members later attended screenings where audiences' responses surpassed their wildest predictions, including people leaving the first row and requesting places further away from the screen. People yelling at the characters not to do certain things, cinema personnel passing out.
The usher keeled over, and not with a chestburster scene, strangely enough. People were just too stunned at that particular moment.
People fleeing to toilets and stuffing the speakers with napkins to drown out the sound, and restrooms littered with vomit. It was obvious that Alien was going to be a success. However, when it came to releasing Alien, the filmmaker shares his discontent with Fox's distribution strategy. They wanted to preview and preview and preview it, and I didn't know why, because clearly it worked like a son of a bitch, Scott said. And they even held it back for 6 weeks, which absolutely baffled me, because they said it's a special film and needs special handling. I don't know who the hell thought of that one. 2 years to the day after Ridley Scott sat in Grauman's Chinese theater to watch Star Wars, Alien hit theaters on May 25th, 1979 in limited release. Huge lines of people waited outside to get into the theater. The movie went on to gross more than $60 million domestically and more than $100 million worldwide. Alien won the 1980 Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, and it would become the first R-rated movie to receive a tie-in series of toys marketed toward children. Upon its release, Alien made a huge impact on pop culture. The chestburster effect was parodied in Mel Brooks' comedy Spaceballs, with John Hurt doing a comedy saying, "Oh no, not again." Nintendo's long-running Metroid game series was created in 1986 as an homage to Alien. In 2003, Scott released a director's cut when over 100 boxes of footage were discovered in a London vault. After digitally restoring the film and adding back several omitted scenes, Scott previewed the extended film, but felt that the added scenes threw off the movie's pacing, which had been his reason for deleting them in the first place. To find a middle ground, he cut out several existing scenes to streamline the movie. Although he prefers the 1979 version as the best possible film they could make back then, he considers both versions to be director's cuts. Fans have since been split on which cut is their favorite, since both contain scenes that are exclusive to their versions. If there is a multiverse, then Alien is so important to cinema history that it would definitely be an anchor point in every universe. Not only would it invent science fiction horror and the female action hero lead, and cause parents to actually heed the R rating, but it would also be the catalyst to launching the careers of other legendary directors like James Cameron and David Fincher. Without Alien, there likely would be no Blade Runner, Total Recall, The Expanse, or other dirty and realistic blue-collar science fiction properties. The bottom line is, cinema owes a thanks to Alien, and its success would go on to spawn at least 8 more movies and a streaming series. And now that Disney owns the rights, the universe that started so small truly has no bounds for what the future holds. But what do you think? What impact did Alien have on your movie watching experience? What is your favorite and least favorite parts of the movie? Share with us in the comments below. We'd love to talk with you about it. And don't forget to check out this video sponsor right now by clicking on the link in the description below to enjoy everything on MyHeritage with a free 14-day trial. Also, this video originally started out as the definitive history of the Alien franchise, but YouTube's complicated algorithm wouldn't allow us to release it all as one video. In the near future, we will be releasing the definitive history of Aliens, as well as the rest of the franchise on YouTube, but if you don't want to wait and would like to see it now, just click on the join button and become a member of the channel, where you can also get sneak peeks on upcoming histories, as well as live shows with us talking about the making of these videos. And once again, thank you for supporting the channel. We couldn't do this without you. A link is about to pop up that will take you directly to these limited collector's edition designs. Every dollar earned goes towards making our next video. Don't forget to get a nice discount by using coupon code THEPOPCAST at checkout. And if you enjoyed the definitive history of Alien, watch our definitive history of Aliens right now.